I'm going to be trying something new with the general format of this video, so forgive me if things are a little rough around the edges, especially if this format continues into the future. Essentially, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to talk more in depth about my feelings on specific things after I finish engaging with them. You know, kind of like the mouthwashing video I did when my channel was really starting out. Just a way to make a time capsule of my initial thoughts on something. And along those lines, I want some straightforward way of presenting my perspective to people without falling into the traditional way of quantifying opinions. You know, rating something on a scale from 1 to 10 or out of 1 to 5 stars. I think going into the idea of discussing art with the intention that you need to give it a rating is incredibly stifling to that discussion. And in general, I think trying to put something on a scale from 1 to 10 or 1 out of 5 stars only really leaves a lot of blind spots with the nuance of discussing your feelings on something. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna lay out this idea I've had for a while now on how I would like to talk about things, and then I'm going to use the basis of that format to look at 3 manga I have very recently read. Sorry to all of the people that I know who listen to my videos while they're working on something or doing something else, but I'm gonna need you to look to the screen for this. Imagine a system where you have 6 stars to rate something with, but you don't rate it 1 out of 6 stars. Instead, you give that something a positive or a negative star for every positive or negative point it has in your mind. You can only give something 6 stars, but you can give it any arrangement of positive and negative stars. Or maybe you loved something so much that you'll give it all positive stars, or maybe you hated something so much that you'll give it all negative stars. The point of this is to provide a straightforward way for people to chunk their opinions on something without creating what is essentially a wall of perspective. Of course, this format starts to break down if you have beyond 6 positive or negative thoughts on something, although I would argue that if you struggle to fit all of your thoughts into this 6 negative or positive star system, then you're probably already writing or saying a lot more on a topic than a 1 out of 5 stars or 1 out of 10 rating system would typically allow. It'll make more sense in execution, I promise. The first manga I'm going to be discussing today is the only manga that has been completed to the time of making this. Undead Unluck is a manga that serializes in the Weekly Shonen Jump magazine and ran from January 20th, 2020 to January 27th, 2025. Undead Unluck is a little hard to describe as far as the way its premise evolves over time, but the original premise is that Andy, a man cursed with something known as undead, is looking for a way to die. He sees the existence of a girl named Fuko, which is cursed with something known as unluck, as his ticket to finally dying. This is at least the original premise of Undead Unluck, Andy trying to find a way to bypass his undead ability with Fuko's unluck. As the story progresses, that original premise is not forgotten, but it is rapidly outpaced by a lot of broader ideas that become more immediately prevalent to the narrative. This leads to the story changing from being about trying to kill Andy to actually trying to kill God for creating such a cruel universe in the first place. In a world where new rules to the universe are added every 3 months and said rules are personified as monsters, the only people who stand a chance against God and his cruel games are humans cursed with something known as negator abilities, which allow them to negate, reverse, or cancel one rule of the universe itself, although typically resulting in a tragedy involving said person when the ability spontaneously manifests inside of them. I would rate Undead Unluck 4 positive stars and 2 negative stars. As far as negative stars go, there are 2 major points that I would bring up before I recommend Undead Unluck. My first negative star is that the first 7 chapters of Undead Unluck are quite uncomfortable to get through due to pretty skeevy content being mandated by Shonen Jump editors when the manga was starting out. Just because that content being at the start of the manga was phased out by the start of the 2nd volume and is what allowed the manga to continue on up to better points, doesn't make it any easier to go through. My second negative star is that I personally felt the ending of Undead Unluck was quite rushed. Yes, there was narrative justification for basically going straight into the end game, but I still felt as if there was more important things that the manga could have focused on in its last moments. Though, to be fair, I didn't find the ending itself unsatisfying, so much as the build-up to the ending being so sudden towards the end of it, just being kind of... I don't have words. Onto the positive stars. The first positive star is that the power system of Undead Unluck with the Negator abilities is one of, if not the most creative power system I have seen in anything ever. Negator abilities being based off of how the Negator themselves interprets the specific law they are negating is really cool. Like, for example, in the manga, the Negator Unseen, who isn't supposed to be seen, has to sneak onto a rocket with a weight limit, but he can't get on because he throws off the weight. So somebody says to him, well, if you're unseen but this rocket is detecting your weight, then that still means you're being seen. And all of a sudden, Unseen becomes able to reduce his weight because, yeah, they're right. If Unseen is supposed to be unseen, but Unseen's weight is being detected, then they're not unseen. My second positive star is for character writing. I think Undead Unluck does an incredibly fascinating job at getting you immediately hooked on a wide array of different characters. It sort of reminds me of the variety that Horikoshi has with characters in My Hero Academia, and just how quickly he's able to sell you on a basic personality trait coupled with a cool design. And speaking of character designs, my third positive star towards Undead Unluck goes towards the character art. I think the creator of Undead Unluck has an incredibly good handle on what makes for a memorable character design. It's really interesting too because Undead Unluck doesn't have a central aesthetic or visual trait to design characters around, which means that the designs essentially have to stand on their own as they speak towards the mangaka's design sense. And for my fourth and final positive star to give towards Undead Unluck, this is cheating, but the anime adaptation by David Pro is really, really good. I find that a lot of the character designs within Undead Unluck that were just sort of okay in the manga, or designs that I liked in the manga, are improved a lot by adding animation into the mix, and other things that an anime adaptation brings to adapting a narrative, like sound design, music, color choice, and whatnot. For the most part, while David Pro's anime does have issues here and there, it also does an incredibly fascinating job at bringing this world to life through the extra avenues that an anime adaptation affords. The next manga I'm going to be discussing today is Gachiakuta, which is serialized in the weekly shonen magazine run by Kodansha. Gachiakuta is a story about a boy named Rudo who lives in a slum directly beside a town filled with rich people who wastefully throw away anything that is even slightly broken into something known as the Abyss, which sits directly beside them. Rudo is accused for the murder of his mentor figure and is cast into the Abyss just like his supposed murderer father was before him. From here, Rudo discovers that the world he grew up in was actually a world in the sky, and the true world is a surface filled with trash directly beneath it in the abyss he was thrown into. By the time I'm making this, only 125 chapters for Gachiakuta have been released. Studio Bones, the company that made an anime adaptation for Full Metal Alchemist and My Hero Academia, have announced that sometime in 2025 an anime adaptation for Gachiakuta will air. I would give Gachiakuta 3 positive stars and 3 negative stars, taking into account that my thoughts will change as time goes on and more chapters release. Also, there's a good chance that the anime adaptation will offer a lot more to the general presentation and feeling of the story in a way that might influence me to be more endeared towards it. Positive star number 1 and negative star number 1 essentially share a position. I really like Gachiakuta's world building. I think it is incredibly creative, and I think it has a lot of potential. Though I also feel like the manga itself doesn't lean on exploring the world building as much as I would like it to, and in general, it kind of feels like the world building is a little under elaborated on, even in the areas immediately relevant to its narrative. This could change with time, but in its current state, I'm split on the fact that I like the world building, but I feel like it could do more. Negative star number 2 is that I don't really care for a lot of the characters that Gachiakuta has so far. The ones that I do like, I like because of their personality, or I like because of their design, but generally there isn't a lot of narrative purpose or general backstory behind a lot of these characters to make me want to like them. Picking a favorite character or favorite characters in Gachiakuta feels like grabbing the first action figure you see on the shelf because you think it looks cool. Those action figures sure look cool though. Leading me into my second positive star to give to Gachiakuta, which is that its character design and general aesthetics / the art of the manga itself is incredibly visually compelling and memorable. Like, there is an undeniable sauce and vibe and energy, and I just think that if there is any reason you are going to read Gachiakuta, besides for wanting a shonen with some interesting ideas in its own right, it's probably going to be the art. Like being realistic, outside looking in, Gachiakuta has such a distinct visual edge to it that anybody who is even slightly interested in the visual arts is probably at least going to be curious. Negative star number 3 is that it feels like the story is taking a very long time to establish itself. The introduction of Gachiakuta itself is very strong. It hits basically every note that a first chapter / first volume should hit. It's not like Gachiakuta has no narrative direction whatsoever. You know, there is the main character's revenge motivation set up in the first volume, and there are like the central mysteries to the broader world building that have been very recently introduced within the manga. That said, it's still a little on the slow side for my tastes. And as for positive star number 3, Gachiakuta is a pretty compelling to follow action shonen if you like action shonen specific ideas. So, you know, if you like power scaling, if you like power systems, if you like storytelling through fight scenes, Gachiakuta's got that. It might not be the best in the industry at doing these things, but it is competent enough in its own right. And above all, if there is anything I respect within a narrative, it is competently executing on the ideas you have in mind, irrespective of if those ideas have been done well before. What matters is if you do them well within your own story. Ruri Dragon is a manga that is serialized bi-weekly on Shonen Jump Plus, which is the online equivalent of the weekly Shonen Jump manga magazine. Ruri Dragon only has 28 chapters as of making this video. The manga is about a schoolgirl who wakes up one morning and finds out that she sprouted a pair of horns from her head. The young girl's mother tells her that her father was a dragon and that the girl herself is half dragon and half human. The manga follows Ruri's day-to-day struggles, as well as the struggles that come about from her having to deal with sudden dragon traits that emerge in her day-to-day life. It's so hard to quantify my thoughts on this manga because it is still so early into its run. For those who aren't familiar, the manga started serializing in 2022, but the author went on a 2-year break due to health reasons, coming back in 2024. If they had still been writing chapters in that time, we'd probably be at least at the 60 to 90 chapter mark, where I would feel a little more comfortable, you know, quote unquote, rating it, but even then, it's not really fair to rate something that isn't finished. That said, I am going to give positive stars for the things that really stood out to me, and as there aren't really things that got on my nerves, there aren't any negative stars I have to give. I guess besides for the fact that there aren't very many chapters to read through currently, and that I'm just generally not a slice of life person, even if Ruri Dragon is very much the kind of slice of life I do get behind. Positive star number 1 is that I really like the art style. It doesn't do a lot of things that are really out there as far as what illustration can offer for showing you, you know, wild and innovative and creative narrative universes, but it gets the job done. It doesn't want to be much more than a moe slice of life manga, and it is quite cute. So yeah, I like Ruri Dragon's art style a lot. Positive star number 2 is that the ongoing storyline of the narrative is presented in a very interesting manner. I am not personally a slice of life person in execution usually. I do tend to find them a little slow for my taste, but what I like about Ruri Dragon is that in between all of the slice of life stuff, there is the excitement of waiting to find out what next dragon trait Ruri is going to suddenly learn about. It's an incredibly strong hook that keeps me wanting to read from chapter to chapter, because it isn't really some grandiose thing that the narrative will eventually have to contend with. It is a very real active thing on the ground floor of the narrative, and it is better for it. Positive star number 3 is that I find the character writing of Ruri Dragon quite endearing. With a story like this, you kind of have to like the main character and the supporting cast to even want to like the story, and at least for me, I do quite like Ruri, and I do quite like her classmates. I like how they take her strange situation in stride and use it as a way to show that she's loved and supported, and I like that Ruri herself, despite the awkwardness that does come from this situation, also takes it in stride with her chin up. It sort of feels like there's a little bit of Ruri in all of us and how we approach situations that are new and scary to us. We could very much shun them and be afraid, or we can take it as it goes and maybe try to see the positive sides of what's going on. And I think the way that Ruri specifically is written to navigate these strange situations that come from her sprouting these horns really demonstrates that idea. Positive star number 4 is the laissez-faire attitude that the series has towards world building. Frankly, it's just really funny to me. You know, you expect in a story like this with a premise that is like, oh, your dad is a dragon, that it would go more in depth into like the existence of dragons within this broader world. But Ruri Dragon just kind of presents these ideas at face value and almost playfully taunts the audience and Ruri herself for wanting to know more. Of course, the story is willing to give you world building, and it does so, but when it does so, it's in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek and very casual way that I don't see with a lot of other urban fantasy premises. It sometimes feels like, in a sense, stories like this have to bend over backwards to accommodate for the fact that the viewer doesn't actually live in these worlds, so they don't know all of this off the top of their head. Ruri Dragon sort of navigates around that as is, with its premise being a sort of fish out of water story, with Ruri learning these things alongside us. The story slash the characters within the story that have this information don't necessarily chastise Ruri or the audience for not knowing these things, but it isn't beyond making a few jokes at the audience's slash Ruri's expense. Oh, and one more thing, if these manga interest you and you check them out, please support the official releases if you have the money or ability to do so.